Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. So I saw some of you flipping through the slides. So if you flip through the slides, you can't answer this question. But for those of you who haven't, just a little guessing game before we get going. If I asked you to identify who is the most well-connected actor in Hollywood among the community of actors, who would that be? Jack Nicholson. Okay. Kevin Bacon. Arnold. Okay. None of those is correct, but we'll come back in a moment, or in a few moments, and hopefully some of the things I'm going to talk about will help you understand why, although those are all very plausible guesses, none of them is correct. Okay, so I want to talk this morning about a topic that there's certainly no shortage of conversation and writing about. That is the topic of networks. And I hope that by the end of the talk, I will have given you perhaps a slightly different perspective on networks than you might get from the kind of writing and commentary that often dominates the subject. At least within the scholarly literature, the way that people think about the role of informal networks, particularly in work organizations, has really changed. The kind of classical view was, that networks were really subversive. That formal bureaucracies were designed so that people's personal relationships really didn't matter, and to the extent that people were using personal relationships, they were gaining influence in ways that didn't necessarily reflect their performance in the organization, and that's really a bad thing. And clearly, I think we've come to recognize that that's not a very fruitful or accurate view, and that in fact in most organizations what networks do is enhance people's ability to perform, which in turn is a basis for them to have influence over the organization. And so it's useful both from your vantage point as someone who is interested in your own career and well-being, but also presumably most or all of you have responsibility for the careers of others, to ask, what are the attributes of networks that are most likely to be advantageous in allowing people to perform well. I'm going to talk about three aspects of networks this morning. How you think about the strength of people that you are connected to, that there's a difference between people that you have a very strong connection to and those to whom you have a very weak connection to, and that doesn't necessarily play out the way you would think. Second, I want to talk about how you develop ties. Obviously, everybody in this room would love to be, close friends with George Bush. George has got a few, things on his plate. He probably doesn't have time for most of us. And so the mere fact of wanting to have a tie with somebody doesn't necessarily make it happen. So how do we think about identifying the appropriate targets, and how do we think about the means by which we can form useful and meaningful ties? And then finally, what kinds of networks are the ones that have particularly beneficial properties? What do you want your network to look like? So I'm going to start with the issue of the strength of ties, and I'm going to ask you to think about two different scenarios of people that are looking for a job. First one, we have Sheila, and Sheila's a biochemist. She lost her job. She calls her sister Alice. Alice is a big, heavyweight director at Drugco. It's a competing firm that's not too far away. Alice makes some inquiries, and lo and behold, the next thing you know, Sheila has a job interview. Second scenario, Norm has a daughter, Kim. Kim goes to nursery school. She's friends with Tina, and Mark's Tina's dad. So Norm and Mark get to know each other, sitting around, watching their kids play. Mark hears that Norm lost his job. One of his clients is looking for a lawyer, and he tells Norm about that opportunity. So the question I want to ask you to think about is, first of all, which of these two scenarios do you think is most likely to generate a job offer, Sheila's or Norm's? And second, which of them do you think is more likely to generate a job offer that will end up being well matched to the attributes of the person looking for a job? Okay. So how many people think that Sheila's situation is the better situation? Okay. So it looks like at least half. How many people think norm situation? How many people are